Our last speaker for this session is Wendy Woon, the Edward John Noble Foundation Deputy Director for Education at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Ms. Woon oversees all areas of MoMA's Department of Education and has more than 30 years of experience in museum education. Since joining MoMA in 2006, she has initiated, led, and participated in cross-institutional initiatives that were key to the museum's future. Currently, she focuses on transforming museum education for the 21st century through experimental, collaborative, and research-based pedagogy. Ms. Woon is currently an adjunct professor at New York University, Master's Art in Visual Arts, and teaches art education in museums. She has presented lectures in many international venues such as Greece, Brazil, Mexico, Qatar, Norway, and many more countries, and now Israel as well. We are happy to have you with us today. We asked Wendy to share with us a part of the challenges and dilemmas that are part of her daily work, and asked what is the most dominant and complex educational challenge of these days. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you. I have the pleasure of being the last speaker. And on the way over, I was walking over in the beautiful pathway with Jasper and with Rika. And Jasper said to me, you know, in Amsterdam, sitting for a long time is now the new smoking. It's supposed to be terrible for your health. So if anyone wants to get up and move for just a moment, I will not be offended. Perhaps you want to do the Vermeer shuffle, or what I call the Picasso line dance. Okay, so I've been told not to rest my paper here or I'm really going to mess up my slides. So if I do that, please bear with me. I'm so pleased to be here today, to be invited to this gathering of great minds. With the increasing global nature of our audiences, it's critical that we build a community that fosters exchange of ideas and knowledge. And I'm really looking forward to learning from all of you today. I'd like to thank Tally and James Snyder and Beverly, who put up with all of our craziness and last-minute changes. So my topic, there we go. My topic, why art matters in the digital age, is a big one. And simply put, it matters because of the power of art and artists to challenge us to move beyond our comfort zones, to shift our personal perspectives, rooted in our often unquestioned value systems, and it encourages us to see and think more critically. Encounters with art can help articulate our differences and find commonalities between us. It can create the connective tissue among our cultures. Yesterday, we heard about the wisdom of locating the Israel Museum centrally on a mountain surrounded by the university and the governing buildings. So the importance of culture will never be out of sight, and I think that's fantastic. Now more than ever, art is a human necessity and not a frill. What technologies can do for cultural institutions is to help us fulfill our democratic goals, to foster the importance of visual arts in people's lives as never before. So here's the context. There we go. Now more than ever, we are living in a culture where life is communicated more visually than ever before, with over 3 trillion images created and shared each year. Culture is shifting from an economy of consumption, as James said, to one of production, where innovation, creativity, and curiosity are necessary skills for successful living. The tools to create and manipulate images, both still and moving, are readily available. And with the ability to capture, post, edit, and share 24/7 without a thought of the power of the image, the lack of its context or new context, it can be very destructive. And we are reminded daily in the news of how powerful visual images can be. The visual culture of Nimrod was so powerful that some thought it necessary to erase. A visual image, a cartoon in Charlie Hebdo, resulted in heinous murders and simultaneously brought people together en masse in global outrage. The whole world is watching, as a poster in this photo illustrating a Time magazine article reminds us, an article documenting nationwide outrage over law enforcement's treatment of African Americans in the United States. Cameras can offer evidence, but they can't tell us what to do with that evidence, wrote author-filmmaker Errol Morris. It's telling that it's an artist who was asked to write this mass media article. I believe that this is the moment for not only artists to take the lead, but also for museum educators whose deep commitment to evolving philosophical, theoretical, cognitive understanding of the gap between visual arts and people's lives is needed more than ever. With museum educators and curators collaborating and continuing to evolve their expert practices, art museums can foster significant social and civic impact. The opportunity for museums to be even more relevant in the digital age requires a shift in our thinking. I propose we rethink the notion of either an object-centered museum at one end or an audience-centered museum in the other, and consider, this is a drawing on the wall of my office where I draw regularly on my chalkboard, the art experience-centered museum as an appropriate to the digital age. One that values deep understanding of how people engage with art, both in direct encounters with art and virtually through digital means. What Robert Rauschenberg termed the gap between art and life is the playing field, and museums must be responsive to the changing needs and behaviors of our audiences to remain relevant. Let me quickly share a personal story with you. I met Telly Gavish in St. Petersburg, where I talked about how digital was impacting the role of museum education. I used this picture of my son, Ethan, then just starting the 6th grade. It's become a tradition in our family on the first day before he starts school, I ask him which museum he'd like to visit. Naturally, it's never my museum. On this occasion, he chose the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And on this day, 4 years ago, Ethan moved wildly around the museum, taking pictures of everything that fascinated him. And over the year, especially this sword, and over the year, he frequently reviewed these images and taking them with him everywhere. His interest in weapons and warfare grew. He became knowledgeable not only about their history and how they could be used in various games. In fact, when I went to Russia, he said, the land of the Kalashnikov. Interesting, they didn't find that funny in Russia. I don't know why. Cultural thing. He used apps that helped them take them apart virtually in 3D, and then he reassembled them, learning all about the materials and the engineering. So by the holidays, he had investigated, compared materials and quality and the cost of 3 katanas, these Japanese swords, on eBay, and made recommendations for which we should purchase for his gift. A year later, he asked us to take him back to the Met, this time with his best friend. Like Tasmanian devils, they were all over the museum. We couldn't keep track of them. And then finally we met them in the arms and armor section. They were wild with excitement and recounted that they had decided that the Met was the only place to go in New York in the event of a zombie invasion. They'd taken that museum and they'd made it their own. And then several months later, the Met played a central role in Ethan's 7th grade creative writing assignment about zombies in New York City. The museum had become a third space, a place between school and home, a place to learn in the least pedantic way through inspiration and imagination. So if anybody's on their way to New York and you encounter this, this is where you need to go, not MoMA. And Donna will greet you there. So how will this next generation experience art, and hence art museums, differently than we do? How will they value authenticity? How will 20th century models of art museums need to evolve to continue to engage and be relevant to these audiences and globally? And how will digital be integrated as part of our normative behaviors of a museum experience? Will there be a new definition of authenticity? At MoMA, we've taken the approach of thinking about the gap, or as I like to think of it, the dynamic space of opportunity, between visual art and the public as a site of research, experimentation, and iterative design. We're constantly posing new and greater questions using participant research, active listening and observation, and inviting contemporary artists into our museum education process to push us to think anew and to continue to innovate. We no longer can think about the physical museum and the virtual museum as separate. Rather, we need to think about people's experiences with art and what means is best to enable them. And if we believe that deep experiences with art, with and through art, resulting in the development of skills to interpret visual art critically, are of paramount importance today, then we need to have a range of strategies to create these conditions, which sometimes might seem counterintuitive or quite analog. I'm not going to be talking about the latest apps today or the whole sort of host of shiny new features. Rather, our experimentation is focused on how technologies enable or challenge today's audiences. So, art matters because I'm engaged in the artist process. In an age of distraction, with people spending an average of 3 seconds, shuffling, looking, we've been experimenting with new ways to slow people down and to engage them more with the art, ideas, and processes of artists. Not to reproduce what artists have made, but rather to personalize the experience, learning by grappling with materials and ideas and through direct contact with artists. Here are 3 examples of experiments that we've been doing. So, adjacent to the Sigmar Polka exhibition, which interestingly had no labels, but a huge handout that was a dense package of information, we created a polka pop-up with in collaboration with Kathy Halbreich, the curator of that exhibition. So, with the help of a facilitator, people were able to explore several activities directly related to polka's process. Participants could not keep their works, as this was not the objective. Rather, they could post them digitally, both a very memorable souvenir to take home and something to share with others. What's kind of interesting is you used to go and buy a postcard after a visit. In this way, you can actually produce or create your own. And we used digital means to actually follow up with people afterwards so they could think about that experience over a couple of days. Here are a few of the comments. I felt a heightened sense of observation, and it generated conversation between me and others. Fabulous. Making art should always be part of the art viewing experience. These kinds of spaces are important. This was the highlight of my MoMA trip. I love art, but I'm intimidated by how good others are at it, so it was great to participate. One of the staff talked about how Polka kept his mistakes in his work, and that made me feel safe too. And finally, I liked everything about what you're doing here. I don't like how much the museum feels like a mall and how cold and busy it can feel, but this is warm and welcoming and invites you to really spend time with art. My friend and I had a great time, and I wish my daughter was here. It reminds me of an experience we had in Denmark, this is for Ida, where we got to make a little book. It meant so much to do that in a museum, and those are the kinds of experiences you remember forever. Gallery sessions are another thing that we've been experimenting with. We actually decided not to do tours anymore. We began to experiment with new methods of engagement for drop-in visitors as opposed to formal tours right in our department meetings, and we would kind of pair up and go out and do something we come up with an idea as a pair and then try something. Sometimes they failed miserably, sometimes they were great. And then we would share that information, and that actually led us to formalize this so that it's now what we do on an ongoing basis in the galleries. So they can range from conversations to activities that require close attention to art making to bringing performative works to life. In this case, one of our challenges is conceptual art, which are often instructions framed on the wall or under a glass case, which really kind of negate the intention of the artist. And so here we were able to actually reperform one of the works in a show about Tokyo. It's called High Red Center Cleanup. And actually, people had to get on the floor and do the activity, which was to clean the floors with toothbrushes. So they really got to experience the whole thing. In this case, we did something in the Mondrian galleries where we actually gave people pieces of the puzzle of what Mondrian's pieces were, and they actually had to sit and look at the decisions that Mondrian had made and try and recreate them. And then we'd challenge them with different background papers to see how that would change the designs. We've also begun experimenting with spaces called MoMA Studios that complement exhibitions. Things that you can't do in an exhibition, we can do as a complement. For example, this one called Common Senses, where we invited 4 artists and designers, including people, the atelieristas from Reggio Emilia, to come and create spaces that engaged people. Of course, an exhibition about design for children where you can't actually play or touch anything, that's kind of a problem. And so we've actually been trying to use these spaces as ways of engaging people. What was really great was over the time that we've been creating these kinds of spaces, we've built an audience of people who've come back, they've gotten to know each other, they've become, they go to each other's weddings, they go to each other's art shows, and it's really built kind of a community. So this is actually one of the things that people say is a benefit, is actually seeing what other people are doing gives people kind of inspiration. This is an example of a series of performative kinds of things that we did for an exhibition of Lygia Clark's work, which Lygia Clark, at the end of her career, started to make therapies instead of art. And so thinking about games and exercises and embodied ways of learning was part of that opportunity with that exhibition. Art matters because it's relevant to my life, and you reached out to connect to me. One of the things that that we think about in terms of technology is what we can do is remove the geographic barriers, the physical and financial barriers, and even emotional barriers. The sense that I don't belong here in a place of high culture, or I don't know enough about art, and provide access to people of all ages. And although the works of art may be reproductions, if we go digitally like we do with our online classes, it does allow people to develop skills of literacy and critical interpretation of works of art that can be practiced in their own local art institutions worldwide. So we've been very fortunate to be able to partner, and I think one of the things that museums need to think about is not thinking that everybody's going to come to you, but actually partnering with places like Coursera that people are going to worldwide, and it's really opened up a whole new world for us. Coursera is the free, massive, open online course platform, and with our generous support from Volkswagen, we've been able to create, we're just working on our 3rd course for K-12 teachers. Jasper actually told me he took the first class. We've had over 60,000 students participate from over 110 countries around the world. So art and inquiry, art and activity, and the 3rd one, modern art and ideas, will be launched this summer. Sharing methods of critical thinking about visual art through videos and forums. We also create kind of regular scheduled Google Hangouts where we can add a discursive and personal responsive quality to it. And then there's peer-to-peer learning is another way. What we found within these MOOCs is that people congregate around, they create their own groups around, kind of affinity groups around their own interests. If they're geography teachers, if they speak a particular language, if they're interested in politics. I think that it's actually over 50% of the participants came from other walks of life. There were people who were doctors from Australia who wanted to teach medical students about how to observe and interpret clearly. And I think this is actually a sign that there's a real hunger for some kind of framework, some kind of skills and thinking and guidance about how to look at images today. What was really interesting is that it allowed us to gain greater recognition. We were really thrilled and surprised to realize that 98% of participants had never heard about MoMA before. So it actually allowed us to bring MoMA and critical thinking about art to a sizable new audience. And now, in collaboration with our Chief Curator of Photography, Quentin Béjac, and his team, we are going to be able to bring our world-renowned photography collection to a global audience and help people worldwide not only learn more about our collection, but also hone their interpretive skills at looking at images. Likewise, we've been able to do this with teens. So our strategy for our teen programs on-site is to aim for depth and integrate the provocative, boundary-breaking processes of artists into the design of all of our teen offerings and engage them, not only with cutting-edge artists, but also empowering them to ultimately create their own research, content, and pedagogical strategies based on what they know to be an authentic audience. So they they're working on their 3rd online course. Here they are. I hope you recognize a few of those female artists. That we were thrilled that there was a focus on women artists. And so they created their own content. And the first year, 75 students participated, and now there's been over 150. In the next one, we're collaborating with the Tate Modern Teens and Art Institute of Chicago Teens, and they're going out to different artist studios and interviewing them in their neighborhoods, and so really getting a sense of what the local art culture is across in these different world locations, and also really trying to draw attention for teens to think about their own communities and where art lives there. So there are many of these models that we're working with that are helping us really experiment with new ways of both using digital and on-site. So art matters because it brings us together and helps us find others like us. So technologies have enabled the social aspects of lives like never before. And currently we're focused on 3 key communities: New York City youth, creative communities of artists, older adults, and overall making MoMA accessible to the larger community of people with all abilities. I'm just going to quickly mention this one. This is Prime Time. This was the celebration of a year of research with older adults. We believe that older adults are a neglected audience, and living longer and creatively is something that they feel very strongly about, and making them feel a part of the institution. So building communities of people that feel comfortable, who come back regularly, is a really important part of our strategy. Several years ago, we created our own online courses before Coursera, and we have 7 online courses. They're fee-based, but what was really interesting for me was that it really fostered a community of people globally. So some alums created this Facebook community 4 years ago. It continues today. The community shares the latest artworks. Their artworks offers advice, recommends exhibitions and books. They meet up at locations around the world, and they've even come to MoMA and they bring us presents. So one woman, Mab, who lives a fairly isolated life, has built, actually, there they are again. Mab actually built a MoMA-like virtual exhibition of their work in Second Life in this online virtual world. She's taken classes with her granddaughter and has been a participant at MoMA for the last 5 years. And finally, art matters because artists give us new lenses to think about and model ways of thinking and being and innovation and creativity in the world. So we've been inviting artists to experiment with us in a program called Artist Experiment over the last 3 years. And what it does is they're very involved. They're artists who really are committed to the engagement of the public and thinking about kind of pedagogy. This is the Office of Creative Research, who's worked with us for the last 2 years. It's a collaborative of 3 amazing people, Jared Thorpe, Ben Rubin, and Mark Hansen. And they became curious about MoMA's digital data and the collection. And it took us 2 years to actually get the data, and I won't tell you why, but you know, museums work in their own mysterious ways. We finally got them the data, and they started to run different tests on it, and what they found were some very interesting things about, and worked with Elevator Repair Service and created an experiential performance in the galleries that was, really kind of raised questions about what a collection meant, what we can learn from data and a collection. What is that? What does information mean when you have so much information? What does that really mean? And what does it mean to the viewing experience? They also compared how many women artists to how many men artists and did a kind of a performance around that as well. It also kind of raised in a sense of what the experience of a gallery, the social experience was as well. And we were able to get some survey results from people, and people talked about it making the museum an organic and living experience, and that it made them look more deeply and want to stay more time in the galleries. So in the end, all art experiences should be an imaginative journey, whether with an artist or a skilled museum educator on site or online. So in summary, As a museum educator, I'm really excited about the potential of art museums to expand their global impact, to create new models of engagement and critical thinking and viewing that not only will enlarge individual lives with greater tolerance and understanding, fostering creativity and imagination, but also connection and commonalities amongst people ideally in nations globally. You probably are wondering what happened to Ethan, right? Every mother in the room is, okay, what's happened? So Ethan's kind of moved on from the Met, and this is on his 15th birthday, a couple of months ago. He's totally interested in aerospace design. He wants to work for NASA. So this was his dream, to go to the Air and Space Museum in Washington. So we took him there. I'd like to think it was Paula Antonelli, his favorite curator, the design curator at MoMA that was influential, or maybe it was a Sikorsky helicopter. But whatever it is, one of the things that I noticed was it was so overwhelming, all of the objects, but what he really gravitated to were immersive experiences, flight simulators, planetarium experiences, the idea of actually playing a game that actually made him feel like what it would be like to be in control and flying an airplane and making decisions. And that's something that I'm thinking about, these ideas of immersive experience on an ongoing basis. I don't have all of the answers, but these are the kinds of questions and experiments that we're doing. Finally, to end, as I was leaving the museum, I noticed that there's this great painting that I think sums it all up. What looks good today might not be what looks good tomorrow. And I think that we have to be agile, we have to be attentive and aware, and always open to playing and experimenting and taking things to the next level. Thank you.